always change, ladies and gentlemen. You see, this is what happens. Now, where do you want to can we start with Trump? Because been away for a week with the kids, and I'm a little bit, and I just said it to Jerome Starkey. What is the theory in your mind? Because 3 years ago, Boris Johnson really cajoled almost everybody in Europe to start providing for Ukraine. We opened our homes to Ukraine. I think anybody and everybody thought this amazingly brave man and this country have managed to sustain against a Russian force that probably thought they'd do it in 3 days, right? And actually, 140 million Russians, 30 million Ukrainians, extraordinary. Now, Donald Trump is known as somebody, Richard, that wants to get things done. I get that, right? But does he need to come out and be calling Volodymyr Zelensky an unelected dictator? That, to me, doesn't seem the right approach. Thoughts?
We'll take a step back. He won a massive electoral victory, including his statement that he would secure a peace deal in Ukraine. And actually, voters quite like it when politicians do what they say they're going to do. So, look, in that sense, he was quite right to phone up the two key players in this, which is obviously President Zelensky and the monster Putin, and to try and see whether or not some form of peace deal could be arrived at. And
but you've just used... I'm not having a go, but you've just used the word that I agree with, which is monster. So why are you only going to talk to the monster whilst you slag off the person who was and remains, I suspect, quite popular, and call him an unelected dictator? That's what I didn't understand.
Because here's the thing about President Trump. He's not your usual politician or diplomat, right? He is a New York property dealer and trader who's come into the world of politics, and he uses a different language. People should have realised that. People should stop being so naive and be surprised by his use of language. At the end of the day, don't focus on the personalities, focus on the objective. The objective is a peace deal possible? Question mark. No one knows, but it must be right to try. If you put everything on the table, all the different facets of it, and see whether something can be negotiated. And of course, ultimately, the Ukrainians are the people who will decide, along with their leader and leaders, as to whether or not a peace deal works.
Do you think it was wrong for him not to include Zelensky in those chats?
Well, Zelensky was the second call he made. So after the monster Putin. And at the end of the day, I think that most conflicts and wars end up with some form of negotiation and difficult compromises, however hard it is. And I've used the example before. For example, Northern Ireland. After 25, 30 years of conflict, very difficult compromises were made, including the United Kingdom possibly conceding a referendum as to whether or not Northern Ireland would join the Republic in decades to come. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. Really difficult, still difficult, but we've had 25 years of peace. Likewise, I've been to Ukraine. I've been to the cemeteries and seen mothers weeping over the graves of their sons. And so I think it must be right to try and put everything on the table, including the critical issue of what are the security guarantees afterwards to ensure that this never happens again. What happens?
I understand that Trump doesn't care what people think. I'm just interested.
And frankly, people here have got to stop being so ridiculously sensitive about the words that he uses.
Okay, no, good point. And
take the man seriously. Don't take every single word literally. I think it's a very sensible way to approach it.
It's very.
But this thing about the money is really important because Trump's a dealer, so he's focusing on the very valuable minerals in Ukraine. The most valuable, of course, of which are in the most eastern part, currently controlled by Russia. And then there's the issue of $300 billion of Russian state assets, cash basically, and various other assets, held primarily in European central banks, that the European leaders are being a bit queasy about actually taking control of and using, either to repay some of our loans and money, and or to invest in Ukraine's future defence and rebuilding Ukraine. All of this stuff should be on the table. Negotiations likely to take some time. Who knows? I just come back, and I've taken a lot of flack in the last week, including from other presenters on this wonderful channel. I just think that it must be right to try for peace.
No, I don't disagree.
And I repeat this. I really want to repeat this point. most conflicts and wars end up in some difficult negotiation. But it must be right to try.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. And for me, listen, if he comes up with a result, it just to me seemed quite strange for somebody who was internationally and globally smiled upon for everything he's done to be labelled an unelected dictator, which is fundamentally untrue. We know whether
we know that.
People get. But here's an interesting thing. The one good thing that has come out of this, in my humble opinion, is something that should have happened many bloody years ago, which is, and listen to this. This started as this was sent to me. The leaders of 500 million Europeans are waiting for 340 million Americans to protect them from 140 million Russians who haven't been able to win against 30 million Ukrainians in 3 years. The one thing that Donald Trump has managed to do is to get the EU to get its head out of his backside and this country and go, do you know what, 2.5% of GDP, it is not enough for our defence. And by the way, this is, and I will say this is not Starmer. This is the Tory. This started with Cameron. Our defences in this country are a disgrace, Richard.
They are
an absolute disgrace.
And that's the reason I first left the Conservative Party back in 2012, because of the appalling strategic defence review that the Conservatives rushed through just after their election.
Easy
in
money to
2010.
save. Easy money to save. When you're relying on America.
At the end of the day, look, you've just raised the point about 450 million European citizens. If the European leaders, including ourselves, don't like the American proposal, then, hey, guess what? Let's put a different proposal forward. That involves a whole load of money and a whole load of kit. Well, I can tell you where the money is. That's the 300 billion of Russian money, right? Why don't we use that, $300 billion? And have we got the kit? Well, there's a big question that no one really wants to talk about. I mean, the Germans had a few helmets, which they offered at the beginning of the war. Let's just remember that. So, look, we've basically, not unreasonably, NATO should always be our overriding security, defensive alliance and blanket. But we've all got to pay our bills. And it's not fair for America to constantly stump up way more than everybody else. And so if we want a seat at the table, frankly, it may be uncomfortable, it may be difficult, but guess what? Money talks.